I love Guild Wars 2. In my opinion, it's the best MMO currently on the market. But the game is starting to run into a problem that has me concerned enough to get my introverted self onto a low quality microphone to talk about it. But before we go any further, I should preface this by saying I am not a professional game designer, yet, and while I have done strikes and dipped my toe into raids in Guild Wars 2, I have mostly played the game fairly casually. So do bear that in mind, and by all means correct me if I get something wrong. A few days ago, ArenaNet posted a preview of the class changes coming to Guild Wars 2 in the next balance update. This included some pretty significant changes to the Necromancer class, particularly the Scourge specialisation. For those of you not familiar with the Scourge, depending on the build, it can take on the role of conjure DPS or a support. I'll be focusing on the support because 1. It's what I actually play when I play a Necromancer, 2. It's, in my opinion, where the unique flavour of the Necromancer really shines, and 3. The balance changes proposed will primarily affect the Scourge support build, although DPS will be affected. I haven't actually played it, so I can't comment on how much. So, what is the support Scourge? It is technically a healer, although its actual healing output is very weak, and it instead focuses on providing barrier to its allies. However, the Scourge can do one thing better than any other class in the game, and that is revive downed allies. Several players go down, press your Shroud 4 or F4 skill, hoover them back up, drop a well, and get them right back in the fight. This fits the class fantasy of the Necromancer excellently, as you're literally raising your allies from the brink of death, and this sort of thing is part of what makes Guild Wars 2 classes so special. So what changes are ArenaNet making to Scourge? Well, they're giving it Alacrity, but to prevent it becoming too powerful with its new Alacrity, they're nerfing its ability to revive allies, and they're nerfing it hard. Now, these changes have been met with a fair degree of criticism from the player base, and ArenaNet have generally been quite good at listening to player feedback, so I don't expect the changes to be implemented in their current state. But why would ArenaNet even consider these changes in the first place? This is where we come to the larger problem. These changes are merely a symptom of the disease that is class homogenization. Class homogenization can affect many MMOs over the course of their life, and if left untreated, can suck tremendous amounts of fun out of the game. Essentially, class homogenization is an attempt to balance all the classes in the game by ensuring they all have access to the same tools. Having played World of Warcraft from vanilla all the way to Battle for Azeroth, I've seen this happen firsthand, and while modern WoW is certainly more balanced than vanilla, the classes don't feel particularly special or unique. Guild Wars 2 actually has great variety in the way many of its classes play, with the elite specializations adding even more on top of that. But because of this, class homogenization could be even more devastating to Guild Wars 2 as a game, because the class design is one of the game's unique selling points. So, what's causing this disease? In Guild Wars 2 case, there are two culprits called Quickness and Alacrity. These boons are so powerful that a class without the ability to provide these boons is seen as significantly less viable in raids and strikes, to the point where ArenaNet feels they need to make at least one of these boons available to every class just to make them viable. However, Guild Wars 2's excellent class customization means that changing your build can significantly change the way you play your character, even within the same elite spec, and the way these boons are being added is making classes or specs viable, but not making fun builds viable. For example, I love the Aura Healing build on Elementalist. It provides excellent healing, but is not popular in raids or strikes because it doesn't provide Quickness or Alacrity. ArenaNet saw that Tempests were not being taken very much in raids, so they gave them an Alacrity trait. But that trait competes with a trait for Aura Healing. This means Aura Healing is still not taken very much in strikes, because it doesn't provide Alacrity, and anyone wanting to play Tempest in endgame content is pretty much forced into taking an Alacrity build, which is not a particularly fun way to play Tempest. So while ArenaNet have made the Tempest as a spec viable at endgame, they have not succeeded in allowing people to play their favourite builds. So, the solution. I can see two potential solutions. The first being my preferred, which is probably the more controversial and would probably take the most time and effort to implement effectively, and that is to nerf the effects of Quickness and Alacrity significantly. If these boons are so powerful that you need to effectively gut existing builds to try and fit a new boon in there, then they're too strong and should be nerfed. Nerfed to the point where it's okay for a class or spec not to have access to them. Nerf to the point where, dare I say it, it's okay to not have 100% uptime on them during a raid or strike. You should still want these boons in your raid group, but they ideally should be brought more in line with Might and Fury in terms of their benefit. This change would have several knock-on effects. Build originally designed with Alacrity and Quickness in mind would likely have to be buffed, as they're now missing one of the things that made them strong. And raid and strike bosses balanced around the expectation of the raid group having all boons available would at the very least need their hit points reduced to keep the DPS checks the same. But I do believe that nerfing Quickness and Alacrity would be beneficial for the long-term health of the game. The second solution, which could also be done in conjunction with the first, would be to sprinkle Quickness and Alacrity throughout many builds so that rather than relying on an individual to provide 100% uptime, your whole raid will passively contribute to the uptime of Quickness and Alacrity, much like how you can be pretty confident of having 25 stacks of Might and 100% uptime on Fury in a raid group, without having to designate a specific person with a specific build to provide them. This would probably have less impact on the wider game balance than the first solution, although some builds will get stronger when soloing or in small parties. But I would prefer to make Quickness and Alacrity not something that everyone must have to be viable, but rather something special that certain builds can bring. A Chronomancer who literally controls time, providing Alacrity, is pretty thematic and definitely fits the class fantasy. All that being said, I have no professional experience in game design, so maybe I'm just talking rubbish. Maybe my solutions would be terrible, but I hope ArenaNet at least recognises that the strength of Quickness and Alacrity is restricting their ability to create fun and varied support builds for endgame content, and that the game would be in a better place if they could find a solution that wasn't just squeeze an Alacrity build into a spec that doesn't really suit it. And I hope we can continue to play a variety of fun and interesting builds at all levels of play in Guild Wars 2 for many years to come.